The following program is classified as PG. It is not suitable for viewing by persons under 15 years of age without guidance from a parent or guardian. This is an opinion-based program. Viewer discretion is advised.
Good evening, I'm Mahieash Johnney. It's 7 o'clock and this is the State of the Nation.
Tonight, floating the rupee and going rogue. Did Sri Lanka's central bank finally cave into the liberal economic brigade and do exactly what the IMF wanted? Now the liberal clan is singing praises while tough times are pretty much ahead.
ඩොලර් එකට රුපියල් 257ක් ඔන්න අද ලැබෙනවා නම් කවුද රුපියල් 200ට ඩොලර් එවන්නේ?
Can the government absorb the shocks and ensure calmness of the economy, or will they pass the rising prices to the people?
I think it's a dichotomy of sorts and we need to address it in a way.
Tonight, we'll talk solutions. Exposing the terrorists. Overwhelming support at the UNHRC for Sri Lanka at its 49th session, where the double standards of the High Commissioner was called out by its member states, delivering a blow to the LTTE-loving Bachelet that was long due.
We stress that we do not believe a single word by OHCHR and call on it to return to its mandate.
Can Sri Lanka ride on this wave and prove the truth to the world once and for all? Or will we forget about it all tonight and come back next year hoping for the best? Preventing the terrorists. Sri Lanka's laws are taking a hard stance on ensuring the safety of its people from terrorism. However, the LTTE sympathizers are not happy.
The Prevention of Terrorism Act
to bring counter-terrorism legislation,
cooperate fully and effectively with the High Commissioner and the UN institution,
to fully cooperate with OHCHR.
Despite their own nations having stricter laws against terrorism, they want Sri Lanka to repeal its own. Tonight we'll explore this banter. And celebrating Women's Day. The woke Columbites celebrated the Women's Day by asking women to objectify them. Do they even know as to what really needs to be done on International Women's Day? That and much more next on State of the Nation.
Well, it's Sunday, the 13th of March 2022. Welcome everyone to the State of the Nation, where we invite you to know your nation, to know the world. As you know, we have a lot to sort out to get you an accurate picture of this country right now. Our initial focus will be on the economy, of course. We will also talk about some jokes cracked at the UNHRC, along with the story where Michelle Bachelet had a tough time showcasing her love for the terrorists. Also, a bit about International Women's Day. But first, tonight as we come on the air, I have to tell you the truth. Sri Lanka is in a really tough spot. Economically, our country is undergoing a dire situation due to the COVID pandemic. We all know its impact. However, the very reason things are tight is nothing to do with economic policies or strategies. It's everything to do with what's happening in the world right now. There's a pandemic, and on top of that, there is a war. So instead of looking at 10, 15, 20 years down the line, the government is challenged with applying much needed fixes to solve problems right now. It's like our ship is indeed sinking. That's a fact. Instead of talking about how to build an ark, we need to find the closest plank that's floating around and hang on to it with our dear life, hoping that the plank can carry our entire weight. How we got here is a useless conversation because we are already here. So instead, the most prudent thing to do is to figure out what we can do right now to solve the issues and how it will impact our path ahead. I've been saying on this show many times that if you look at everything that's occurring in this country, it's evident that negativity rules the day. Today, switch on any news channel, any news program. Each and every problem in the nation is on display. Now, what's the missing fact on this? We have the complaining, but where are the solutions? Solutions being communicated to the people, that fact is indeed missing. We are a democracy, meaning we have a governing party and an opposition. The governing party's job is to, well, simply put, govern, ensure that its citizens are provided with the best possible life that they could have in this nation. This is why candidates develop vibrant manifestos during elections, asking the people's support to execute them. Now, on the other side, the opposition's duty is to pretty much showcase potholes of those plans and get the country on the right track. So both sides are doing one common thing, working for the betterment of the nation. Is that the case here in Sri Lanka right now?
You may have seen many recent articles and headlines about one of India's immediate neighbors being on the verge of bankruptcy. That's right, the island nation of Sri Lanka is facing a deepening financial crisis.
Diesel ne, petrol ne, kiri ne, gas ne, behet ne, current ne. මිනිසුන්ට තද වෙලා ඇමතිවරයෙක් නෑ කතා කරන්න මිනිහෙක් නෑ මේක නෙවෙයි නම් බංකොලොත් මොකද්ද බංකොලොත්.
For Sri Lankans panicking to purchase petrol, it may seem like they're watching their economy crash in slow motion.
Sri Lanka is facing its most severe financial crisis.
Well, we can see the opposition doing their job of showcasing the potholes of the plans of the government. So where's the government's response? That's the problem. Why we see so much of negativity ruling these days on our social strata is because the people in power have simply forgotten to do one thing that's necessary, key and quintessentially important to the growth of this nation. Respond to the criticism. While the leaders of this country are working tirelessly to solve the problems of this nation, the people appointed to do their PR game is sleeping. Let's take a simple example. Currently, there's a lot of conversation about the economy. You can see people who are part and parcel of the erroneous economic policies now sitting in the opposition and giving failed economic advice one after the other. Anything that is being done right now, for them, in their eyes, it's wrong.
වෙළඳ පොළ ප්‍රසාරණය කරන්න නම් ලෝකෙත් එක්ක එකතු වෙන්න ඕනේ. මේ ගහලා තියෙන තාප්ප කුඩු කරන්න ඕනේ. අපි පාලම් බඳින්න ඕනේ. ඉතින් ගරු කතානායකතුමනි තීරුම් ගන්න අපි ඔබතුමාගෙන් සහ රජයෙන් ඉල්ලනවා විපක්ෂ වගකීම් විපක්ෂයක් හැටියට මේ ගමන මෙහෙම යන්න බෑ.
Well, in order to respond to this nonsense, to bring clarity, to bring understanding to the people, the responsible institutions are failing to do their part. The leaders are kept away from the people rather than putting them right in front and clearing doubts in people's minds. At a time of crisis, the truth is what matters. Look at all the world leaders. Former President Donald Trump was taking media briefing after media briefing on the onset of the COVID pandemic, dispelling rumors and bull that was said about America. Right now, Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, is on television 24/7 responding to the West, ensuring that his people gets his message. And on the other side, the Ukrainian president, Zelensky, wearing a simple T-shirt, he's on TV all the time, speaking to the people, ensuring his countrymen knowing what's going on. Leaders communicating to the public and responding to criticism is a must. The PR goons and their stupid response these days here in our country, oh, we are not going to respond to those criticisms. Really? What does that do? Give more time and space for the bull to take shape. See, in the final months of the Yahapalne joke, ministers of that government did many things and they said, hey, we did a lot of work, but it has never been discussed in the media. They agreed and they said and they accepted that we failed to communicate it. But we did a lot of work. Of course, they did a lot of work to bury this country in a lot of debt and misery. But they did agree that they failed to communicate appropriately. And this government too has past experience of its inability to communicate, costing them everything. This is precisely what happened in 2015 when President Mahinda Rajapaksa sought re-election. He was accused by the Yahapalne joke left, right and centre.
Mahinda lokka අතරදාන ඔරලෝසුව ලක්ෂ 95ක් 150ක මුදලක් ඒකෙන් හොරකමට අයින් කරපුවා.
අපේ ලංකා බැංකුවේ ටැප් රොබෙන් ශාඛාවේ
කෝටි 750ක් ආරක්ෂක ලේකම්ගේ නමින් සල්ලි තිබ්බා.
We now know that it wasn't the truth. But what did the people responsible for communicating the president's message do at that time? Went on ranting about how much development they did in the country instead of responding to the criticism. And in the end, the lies won due to the absence of the truth. And that cost this country heavily. Right now, this government too is doing the same thing, failing to correct the errors out there, and because they were unable to do so, the bull by the opposition rules. Listen, in times of crisis, people of this country needs to know that their leaders are not shaken by the current situation or are overwhelmed by the current problems. They need to know there's a plan and that we are going to be okay. We need our leaders to give us a sense of security. We need to see our president visually on the ground telling the people that he's tirelessly working to ensure that we will get out of this crisis. If that is visible, then the people will do their part in weathering the crisis, knowing that their leader, they elected, is still fighting for them and not listening to the bull spewed by the opposition. Unfortunately, the people responsible for making that happen, the PR teams of our leaders, the so-called media units, media coordinators within these ministries and offices, are failing miserably. And due to their inability to do their job right, negativity, misinformation, fabrication, and falsehoods rules. I mean, we were promised with White House-style daily press briefings, right? What the heck is that? There's a state-of-the-art media center built for the president's office, but the media briefings? That's messy. If the president, the prime minister, the government and the rest of the ruling party lets this slide and allow the bull to rule, then don't be surprised when the people decide in 2024 based on that bull. It's time for clarity. It's time for the truth. Welcome back. All right, let's start with the most significant issue at hand, the economic situation in Sri Lanka. Like I said, not so good. Last week, the central bank made a surprising decision to float the rupee. Now, it's trading within the range of around 250 to 260, I think also 270 against the dollar. The banks are deciding the rate. When it goes up significantly, there's going to be repercussions. The biggest one that might occur, and is occurring right now, is the rise of prices exponentially. Our entire price structure will take a massive hit as we go on. Now, I will not join the doom and gloom brigade and start scaring you, but I'm trying to break this to the level that you and I can understand and think rationally. There is no room for fear. Now, the decision by the central bank has its negative and positives. Many liberal-thinking economists believe that this was the right thing to do. Let the market decide as to what the price of the rupee is against the dollar. However, others were strongly advocating against this. They wanted to hold the rupee at around 200 rupees per dollar and keep the imports low. For some reason, the central bank governor has decided to float it. We now know that this was one of the requests made by the IMF during their visit to Sri Lanka, and it was there in their assessments as well. So it also begs the question, did the central bank finally cave into the pressure and did exactly what the liberal economist wants and basically did what the IMF wants?
අපි පාවිච්චි කරලා තිබිච්ච සමහර මෙවලම් අපිට වෙනස් කරන්න සිදු වෙලා තිබෙනවා. ඒ නිසා තමයි මේ සතියේ මුල් භාගයේදී ශ්‍රී ලංකා රුපියල තවදුරටත් නම්‍යශීලී භාවයට පත් කිරීමට අපි තීරණය කළා තිබෙනවා. පොලි අනුපාතය වැඩි කිරීමට තීරණය කළා තියෙනවා. අපි දන්නවා මේ වයින් සමහර විට විවිධ ප්‍රතිවිපාක ජන ජීවිතයට ලැබෙන්න තිබුණත් දිගු කාලීන ස්ථායි භාවය රැක ගැනීම සඳහා මහා බැංකුව ඒ තීරණ අරන් තිබෙනවා.
අපි දකිනවා වෙළඳපොලේ යම් වෙනස් වීම් සිදු වෙනවා විනිමය අනුපාතිකේ. ඒතර සමහර වෙලාවට අපි නුදුරු දිනක යම් කැළඹිලි ස්වභාවයක් දකින්න පුළුවන්. නමුත් අපි හිතනවා විශේෂයෙන් වෙළඳපොලේ විශ්වසනීය බව, වෙළඳපොලේ ක්‍රියාකාරීත්වය දියුණු වීමත් සමගම ඉතාම ඉක්මනින් වෙළඳපොළ තුල විනිමය අනුපාතිකය ස්ථාවර වෙන්න බොහෝ දුරට අපි ස්ථාවර වෙනු ඇතයි බොහෝ දුරට අපි අපේක්ෂා කරනවා. දැන් විනිමය අනුපාතිකය මෙහෙම යම් ප්‍රමාණයක නම්‍යශීලී වෙද්දී එයින් යම් බලපෑම් ඇති වෙන බව අපි දන්නවා. විශේෂයෙන් මිල ගණන් වලට රජයේ මූල්‍ය කටයුතු වලට යම් බලපෑමක් සිද්ධ වෙනවා. නමුත් දැන් මේ දේවල් අපි දකින්නේ తాවකාලිකව ඇති වෙන කම්පනයක් විදිහට පමණයි. මොකද අපිට ආර්ථිකයේ දිගුකාලීනව කිසියම් ස්ථාවරභාවයක් ලබා ගන්න අවශ්‍ය නම් කෙටි කාලීනව යම් දුක් ගැහැට සහ දුෂ්කරතා විඳින්න වෙනවා. ඉතින් අපි හිතන්නේ කෙටි කාලීනව මෙවැනි තත්වයක් තිබුණත් අපිට ආර්ථිකයේ යම් ස්ථාවරභාවයකට ගේන්න පුළුවන්කම තියෙනවා. විශේෂයෙන් විනිමය අනුපාතිකය ලිහිල් වෙද්දී අපි දකිනවා වෙළඳපොලේ විදේශ විනිමය ද්‍රවශීලතාවය ඉහළ යනවා. ඒ වගේම අපනයන දිරිගැන්වීමක් සිද්ධ වෙනවා. අනවශ්‍ය ආනයන තවදුරටත් අධෛර්යමත් වෙන්න පුළුවන් රජයේ ක්‍රියාමාර්ගත් සමගම.
Well, as I said, Sri Lanka does not have many options right now. There's in fact limited options. We can keep begging from countries like India, China and the rest of the world, but how long can that last? The next is going to the IMF. Now, that solution will ease our burden in the shorter term, but very bad for Sri Lanka in the longer term. I know. We have to think about what we are going to do right now. And then the other options is to tighten our situation internally, cut down on unnecessary expenditure, and get in new money, which means foreign direct investments. Now, the decision taken by the central bank seems to be favoring the latter one. They seems to be cutting down a lot of imports to the country and making sure that they are looking for, by floating the rupee, it entices certain type of investors out there, but that is yet to be seen. We also need to ask a question as to why suddenly we are facing this economic crisis. As I told you, COVID is the reason. We don't have to figure it out. We know it's COVID. Because of COVID is the reason that our economy took a massive hit, and here we are. To understand how much of an impact COVID has made in on our economy, Danidu Dhanavasam joins me now from the data wall to break it down all for you. Danidu, good to see you. What have you found thus far? I mean, there is a massive impact from COVID on the Sri Lankan economy. What kind of details do you have for us tonight?
Yes, Mahieash. Now, it is very difficult to put an exact figure when we are trying to explain the exact impact on the economy. But we are going to look at certain areas which have been creating foreign exchange, which we completely lost out on. Now, tourism, an aspect that everyone is talking about. What exactly was the impact from the pandemic? Now, in 2019, we see the average amount of inflows, about 1.9 million tourists coming in. In 2020, a drastic drop. And even 2021, another drastic drop with an estimated loss of over $8 billion US. Now, that is the kind of ripple impact we are seeing. The loss of that kind of amount is what we are seeing as of now, because we are now looking for foreign exchange. We'll take that same sentiment forward to remittances. Now, even the remittances situation was similar. 1.6 billion that we have lost out on from the year 2020 to 2021. These are figures from the central bank. Now, again, in a position where we are looking for foreign exchange, these are the kind of reasons why we are seeing a situation like this within our country. Translating all of that, we have seen that the GDP has been equally very badly affected given the kind of situation that has been generated in the world. Now, the reason why I say in the world is because of two reasons. The central bank and the government are taking steps to rationalize imports and to create that, to save the money within this country, right? To create inflows and to save the money. But the second factor that we should bear in mind is that there's a war currently taking place between Russia and Ukraine, and we should bear in mind the kind of impact that would have on our country. Over to you, Mahieash.
Indeed. We have to wait and see how exactly all this will, translate to. Danidu Dhanavasam at the data wall. Thank you very much. Well, if you ask the business community today, they will say the floating of the rupee should have been done months before. The argument is simple. Take, for example, what has happened thus far here in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has been lavishly importing unnecessary items since 2020 without capping them. We knew COVID was raging on in the world, and there's going to be a tough time on the economic front, not just in Sri Lanka, but all around the world. We should have put import controls many years back, maybe as soon as the whole pandemic started, and ensure that we are not at a tight spot right now. But since we didn't, we had to print an exuberant amount of money to keep the economy running. That amounts to around 1.3 trillion rupees. So while we print money from one side, we hold the dollar at around 200 rupees instead of allowing the markets to decide. In comes multinational companies which are rampant in Sri Lanka and several other companies that are importing everything. For them, this is gold. Since we are not letting the business of the day dictate the accurate price of the dollar, they make a good bang to the buck. For an example, let's take an import of a certain milk powder. He's having a really good time. How? Well, because he's paying a lower rate for the dollar. On the other hand, we are printing money and providing it to our people. Now, what does our people do? They go take that money and buy that same imported milk powder instead of buying a local product. And so even the money we printed goes out of the country. Now, with the markets deciding the accurate rate for the dollar, many businessmen believe that there will be a cut down on unnecessary imports and provide an opportunity for the local manufacturer to increase its presence. However, economists who argue against this move say that the government should have addressed the critical issue that led to this current crisis, fuel prices, and not meddle with the rupee. They believe that if the government cannot manage the flow of fuel, which is buying and selling fuel, then to provide that opportunity for the private sector to address that and work that crisis rather than going to the far end to let the rupee float. They also say that this would have indeed lead towards prices of everything soaring and our current price structures of every commodity taking a massive hit, as you can see that is happening right now. What's done is done. The rupee is floating, and the markets are deciding the price of the currency. This is not the first time Sri Lanka has allowed that. This also happened during President Chandrika Kumaratunga's tenure back in 1995 and in 2000 when Sri Lanka was facing a brutal conflict. We resorted to this matter mainly because this is beneficial for the government's immediate crisis at hand.
රජය භාණ්ඩ පිටරටින් එන අවස්ථාවේදී තීරුබදු අය කරනවා. තීරුබදු අය කරනකොට මේ ලංකාවේ අද තිබෙන තීරුබදු ප්‍රමාණය සාමාන්‍යයෙන් සමස්ත අපේ ආනයන පරිමාව ගත්තාම මේ පරිමාවෙන් 105ක පමණ මට්ටමක තමයි අපි අද තීරුබදු අය කරන්නේ. ඉතින් අර රුපියල අප්‍රමාණය වීම නිසා අපි අය කරන තීරුබදු වලින් ලබන ආදායම රජයේ වැඩි වෙනවා. පළවෙනි. දෙවෙනි එක තමයි දැන් රජය අපි හිතමු ඩොලර් 100ක් ණය ගත්තොත් එහෙම පිටරටින් ඒ ඩොලර් 100 මහ බැංකුවට විකුණන්නේ රුපියල් 200 මට්ටම හැටියට රුපියල් 20000ක් තමයි ආණ්ඩුවට ලැබෙන්නේ. නමුත් දැන් මේක අවප්‍රමාණය වුණොත් 250ට රජයට ලැබෙනවා රුපියල් 25000. ඇත්තටම රජය මෙතෙන්දී මේ සිද්ධ වෙන්නේ වාසිදායක තත්ත්වයක ඉන්නේ.
Well, what I can say about this is simple. I'm not a decision maker on this matter, but certainly the decisions taken by those decision makers will affect me just like it will affect you. History will judge whether the correct move was made, and in about a month or so, we will reap the benefits, whether it's good or bad. So my dear friends, buckle up. We're in for a bumpy ride. Let's get some clarity on this economic situation as well and steps taken by the government. For that, I'm now joined by parliamentarian Professor Ranjit Bandara, one of the economic minds of the current government. Professor, thank you very much for joining. Good to see you. Now, many local economic pundits are finding it absolutely baffling, parliamentarian, that the government depreciated the rupee. What was the thinking behind this, and why was it necessary to take this decision right now?
I think we are not taking it in a hurry. This has been the case for long. I would say we would have taken it a little early, but of course we were a bit cautious when the rupee is in the floating mode. It would have had different consequences. That is why I think the central bank was a bit reluctant and delayed. However, unless we implement this type of policy, the situation would have been much worse than that we could even imagine. Now, there are quite a few serious concerns. One of them is that how we could encourage our export revenue and also the remittance. And the tourism, of course, just started, but still, to some extent, the COVID is a global phenomenon in terms of normalcy. Therefore, there was a huge request by various parties. I think the governor of the central bank have taken some of these positive concerns in relation to the foreign exchange. What the management system that would better fit into the current the crisis.
Parliamentarian, can you confirm that the government has indeed floated the rupee, and was this decision based on a request made by the IMF?
No, this is not depreciation. This is a kind of a guided floating arrangement. Why we call it a guided, Mahieash, you know very well, we want rupees to be stable in relation to a dollar. Now, we had two choices, either to maintain in an artificial manner by pumping money to the market to meet the demand, the dollar demand, but how long we could do that. And when the central bank introduced this guided the floating exchange rate policy, in the short run, as you could see, the exchange rate go somewhere between 260 to 280 rupees per dollar. But I am pretty sure within a few weeks it will settle, and the central bank is happy to see it somewhere in 230. So this is basically not the depreciation. This is a guided floating. This is not the advice this was not done by the advice of IMF or any other global financial institution, and we must keep that in mind. We have about 450 learned economists at the central bank, and also we have quite a few able people at the treasury, and even in the academic circles there are quite a few learned people. I think their opinion has also been taken into account.
Makes perfect sense, but there is a lot of fear in the country that our economic conditions will be like that of Prime Minister Sri Lanka back in, I think, the 50s or the 60s. Do you think that's the case right now?
No, you see, the Sirima Bandaranaike's economic policy was inward-looking economic policy. Everyone knows it's as a closed kind of economic policy. Now, we are not into it, but all what we are trying to do is that if we could rely on ourselves to an extent, so what is the extent that we could rely on ourselves? Now, say for example, some of these basic things we don't need to import, and we certainly can manufacture locally. So, and restricting some of these non-essentials, in one hand we are trying to manage our existing foreign reserves in a wiser manner, and also on the other hand we are trying to encourage the local industries by creating opportunities for unemployment. Now, unemployment could be a problem time to come unless we address in such a way, and I think we must go beyond the politics. We would have opened it up like in 1977. How many infant industries collapsed? and how many opportunities we have lost. Therefore, the President is quite clear that the Sri Lanka has the potential of doing certain things in a very sustainable manner. So let's see how we could move forward.
Parliamentarian, now according to economic pundits here in Sri Lanka, they suggest that the IMF is the final solution. Is the government also thinking in that direction?
You see, this is the thinking that the opposition has always been put forward. They don't see there are options. Now, one of the questions that we should ask ourselves is that why not we look for what the global financial institute, including IMF, could offer for us to walk out from this crisis. And we being a member of the World Bank and the IMF and various other global financial institutions, why not look for opportunities as a member? And politically one could create a kind of ha-hoo. You know, the IMF is the last resort. I mean, we have been to IMF 16 times, whereas Pakistan been 21 times. And of course, there are countries, they were not very helpful in getting the economy right with the advice of the IMF. That is the kind of a fear that the certain political factions have created in the minds of the general public. Therefore, I would say, if something that need to be done, whether it is advised by the IMF or any other global financial institution, we must look for it. We should not say no to anything as because we need to get out from this mess somehow as soon as we could.
Parliamentarian, even though you say and you deny the government is not following the IMF, on paper it looks like we are following the instructions of the IMF. Why don't we, bite the bullet and go now take the money?
You see, there are certain questions, there are certain areas of improvements we have to do whether IMF asks or not. Now, if I ask one simple question from the audience, don't we need to increase the government revenue? Now, if you take the government revenue in relation to GDP, we are one of the lowest in the world. And also, don't we need to rationalize government expenditure? Don't we need to manage our public enterprises in sustainable manner? Don't we need to underutilize public resources in such a way? So these are the things that we should do, whether IMF or any other global financial institution asks us to do or not. Right? Now, rather than creating a mindset and changing the mindset of general public, I don't think help at all to get out from this mess. Thank you, Mahieash. Thank you very much having me.
Well, thank you very much, Parliamentarian Professor Ranjit Bandara. Thank you very much for your time. Let's take a short commercial break. Upon our return, there's victory at the UNHRC in Geneva. Back in a moment with the details. Welcome back, everyone, to the State of the Nation in Geneva, Switzerland. While the terror lovers gather, trying to put Sri Lanka through the gutter, after 13 years, something amazing happened.
It is a matter of deep satisfaction to us that the Sri Lanka government's position was endorsed by 31 out of the 45 countries that participated in the interactive dialogue on Sri Lanka. That is a very considerable triumph.
Now, finally, member nations of the UNHRC are waking up to the cock and bull story, masterfully elaborated and illustrated by LTT terror sympathizer Michelle Bachelet. also known as the UNHRC High Commissioner. Now, the member nations were not having it. They had enough that this corrupt High Commissioner, after feasting herself with LTT propaganda funds, were coming after a sovereign nation that led a humanitarian operation to save its own people from what was known as the most ruthless terrorist organization in the world, the LTTE. Listen to this speech by the Belarusian delegate who made this statement at the UNHRC session that explains the bull by the UNHRC.
OHCHR is being made to look like an externally controlled investigation. The information provided by OHCHR for this session on Sri Lanka and Belarus is a clear example of the implementation of this concept. In this connection, we stress that we do not believe a single word by OHCHR and call on it to return to its mandate as defined in UNGA Resolution 48/141 and strictly observe the principle of neutrality in its activities. We have to discuss the situation of Sri Lanka, and this should not be on the agenda of the Human Rights Council at all. We commend the government of Sri Lanka for its success in post-war reconstruction and reconciliation, and for further improving the standards of living of its people. We call on the Council to engage in mutually respectful dialogue with Sri Lanka and reject politically motivated decisions.
Well, we need to understand the end game of organizations like the UNHRC. If you look at the budgets of the UNHRC and the UN, you will see it runs into billions of dollars. Billions. I think last year it was around $27 billion to the UN. Now ask yourself, what the heck do they do with that money? Do a little bit of research. You will find that most of this money is utilized to maintain staff, do useless, time-consuming, unproductive meetings, travel, take care of their staff's well-being, all that la-di-da expenditure. What goes to the real people who needs assistance? Chip change. Of course, they put media statements after statements saying, we provided $1 million for the vaccination program in Sri Lanka. They didn't, I'm just taking as an example. So $1 million for this activity. Now that's a lot of money. And we think, oh my God, they really do help. But what we need to look at is, what's the percentage of funds you actually give back to the welfare of the people to ensure their well-being? $1 million out of an exuberant budget of over $1 billion is nothing. It's like if I suddenly become a billionaire today, I will go to the temple and give a donation of 100,000 rupees just for me to feel good about myself. That doesn't mean that I gave away everything I have, or at least a majority of what I have. You also need to understand about this woman called Michelle Bachelet. She is currently the High Commissioner of the UNHRC, but before that she was the President of the Republic of Chile. When Michelle Bachelet left office, she had some of the lowest domestic approval ratings, around 26%, according to Al Jazeera. This was primarily due to the government being leveled with corruption charges, including her own family. But her son was accused of using political influence on banks in that country. Her own son, Sebastian Davalos Bachelet, had to resign as the head of the government's charity after he was accused of using his influence to get a large bank loan for his wife. Now, during her tenure as the president, the indigenous community of Chile, known as the Mapuche people, had been persecuted under her government, for which she later apologized at the end of her tenure. The Associated Press reported that the government of President Michelle Bachelet is persecuting Mapuche activists with secret evidence, prosecuted witnesses, and other tough aspects of an anti-terrorism law. Yeah, she's the one to talk about human rights. Joining me now is Justice Minister Ali Sabri. He was part of Sri Lanka's delegation to the 49th session of the UNHRC. Minister, appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Now, sir, we can call the events that occurred at the session a massive victory for Sri Lanka. A majority of the countries at the UNHRC stood against the High Commissioners for the Commissioner and her report. And was that the exact message you also got from your face-to-face interactions with other delegates?
Definitely. We have had a very good discussion and cordial relationship with most of the delegations, Mahieash, and we managed to convince them and out of 45 countries, 31 countries spoke in favor of our resolution and the manner in which we have responded, and they all told the same thing that we wanted, that Sri Lanka need time and space and a domestic mechanism in order to come out of this, whatever the issues we have.
Indeed, Minister. Now, during this whole UNHRC session, especially from the High Commissioner, despite commending, fake commendations about specific steps taken by Sri Lanka on human rights front, she criticized the judicial system and mentioned that apparently there is no trust in the processes we have initiated here. How do you respond to that?
I just don't agree with it. Basically, we have a very independent judiciary. If you know, Mahieash, last few weeks or few months, there are several judgments against the government too. That shows the independence of the judiciary. We know how bold is our Human Rights Commission itself. They are very categorically told, for example, to remove the PTA. So therefore, we have a credible mechanism within the country. We also have OMP, we also have OR, we also have ONUR, which were just institutions during the last government. And most of the time it was confined to a name board. But we have done a lot of work there. We have in fact visited and had mobile services in those areas. So therefore, a lot of work had been done. To someone to say and just categorically disregard all what we have achieved over a period of time, which most of the Western partners too aware, is sometimes disappointing.
Indeed, the hypocrisy of the UNHRC is very evident. Minister, where do we go from here? What is the next step? Are we going to forget about this and come back next year, revisit the whole thing? Or are we taking steps to erase the unpleasant but biased, bogus attempts by the UNHRC to discredit Sri Lanka and our military's humanitarian operation?
No, we will continue to work with them. Human rights and the international relationship and diplomacy is a complex issue. We cannot antagonize anyone. We need more friends. Our policy is non-aligned. We are friends of all and no enemy to anyone. So therefore, it's important that we continue to engage, educate them. Unfortunately, there are some people who are hell-bent on capitalizing on the differences amongst the communities. What we are focusing on is to build on the trust which we have built over a period of time and slowly move on towards that. For example, this morning I just had a discussion with Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs to finalize the amendments to the PTA. We are not just resting. We are just 2 days after the UNHCR's sessions. So the amendment to the PTA will be debated on the 22nd of this month, and similarly last week Cabinet after the UNHRC sessions approved one of my proposal to appoint 25 panels to inquire into the complaints of those who have been missing or their loved ones have complained. So therefore we have a lot of focus on that. That's why we were able to go before our friends and tell them and brief them, and that's how they all spoke in our favor. So I think if we work very carefully without creating unnecessary issues here in Sri Lanka, if you go through the UNHRC report itself, some of those things could have been avoided. So it is important that we don't repeat the mistake. We work on what we have started, we build trust, and we put people-to-people contact between North and South and build that credibility where all Sri Lankans in this country, irrespective of their race, religion or culture and language, could live with dignity and respect.
Well, Minister of Justice Ali Sabri, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it. Now, while Sri Lanka was making headway and actually doing an excellent job convincing the world that it's all bogus accusations being leveled at Sri Lanka, two clowns and a clergy head to the terror lovers' capital and speaks against their motherland.
To speak to you, to seek your help. Sri Lanka journey of impunity needs to stop. Its journey of silencing and imprisoning honest people like my friend Ranjan Ramanayaka, who has been imprisoned for 4 years for demanding justice and calling out corruption, needs to stop.
As this is a case of a serious violation of the fundamental rights of the aggrieved victims, we earnestly call upon the UNHRC and all its member countries to support the continuation of evidence gathering initiated by the Council last year and to devise a means to ensure an impartial investigation to unravel the truth behind the Easter Sunday massacre.
බටහිර ලෝකේ අලුත් ආගම වෙලා තියෙන්නේ මානව හිමිකම් කියන ආගම. මේ මානව හිමිකම් කියන ඒවා ආවේ මේ ඊයේ පෙරේද. හරියට නිකන් මේ අලුත් හොයාගත්තු පුදුමාකාර සොයා ගැනීමක් වගේ. ඔළුවට තියාගෙන ඕක තමයි හැමතිස්සෙම අපිට කියන්නේ. මානව හිමිකම් මානව හිමිකම් වල එල්ලීගෙන ඉන්නේ ආගම් අදහන් නැති මිනිස්සු. ආගමක් අදහනවා නම් මානව හිමිකම් ඕනේ නැහැ අපිට. ඒ නිසා මේ මායාවට අපි රැවටෙන්න හොඳ නැහැ. අපි බුද්ධිමත්ව මෙහිදී කටයුතු කළ යුතුයි.
ඒක තව එකක් තියෙනවා. අපි මේ රටේ ප්‍රතිපත්ති පාවා දෙන්න හොඳ නැහැ විදේශීය රටවල්.
ඒගොල්ලෝ අපිට ඇවිල්ලා අපි මොනවද කරන්න ඕනේ කියලා යෝජනා කරලා ඒක කරන්න අපිට තල්ලු කරන එක සුදුසු නැහැ.
Well, I will not waste my time talking about those two clowns, Harin Fernando and Manusha Nanakar from the SJB on their idiotic action. After all, if you are part of the SJB, then it's expected they display this low quality of behavior, because that is the default quality you need in order to be part of the SJB. Also stands for spreading gibberish bull. However, as a Christian, I have something to say about the action of our beloved leader of the Catholic Church. As a leader of the Catholic Church, there's no other way you can act but as the way of Christ. Therefore, at any given point in that person's life, he has to uphold the teachings of Christ, no matter what the earthly circumstances may be. For a simple example, let's take Jesus Christ himself. The good book teaches us that the utmost important teaching of Jesus was love. In Matthew chapter 22, verses 36 to 40, we read that when a person raised a question as to what's the greatest commandment of them all, Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. And this is the first and the greatest commandment. And the second is like, love your neighbor as yourself. All the laws and prophets hang on to these two commandments." Now, when Jesus mentioned this, his circumstances was very ordinary. He was not being prosecuted, not being accused, or was on trial. However, when that circumstance changed, like when the Jews accused him, tortured him, and in the end crucified him, did he change his teachings? Did Jesus Christ change his word? No. If you read Luke chapter 23:34, it clearly says that while he was hanging on the cross, he pleads to God, saying, "Father, forgive them as they do not know what they do." Right throughout his actions were exactly what he preached: love, forgiveness, and care for humanity. Oh, Mahieash, that's Jesus Christ. Surely you can't expect a human being to act like that. Well, I'm sorry, I can. Because that's what we expect from the leader of the Catholic Church. I mean, look at Pope John Paul II. On 13th May 1981, at St. Peter's Square in Vatican City, Pope John Paul II was shot and wounded by a gunman called Mehmet Ali Agca while he was entering the square when the Pope was going for a service. The Pope was shot 4 times, lost a lot of blood, came on the verge of death. Following the shooting, Pope John Paul II asked people, while bullets were in his body, "Pray for my brother Agca, whom I have sincerely forgiven." He didn't stop there. In 1983, he and Agca met and spoke privately at Rome's prison. The shooter, Agca, reportedly kissed the Pope's ring after their visit. The Pope was also in touch with Agca's family over the years, meeting his mother in 1987 and his brother, and he forgave just like what Christ did. That's the action of the leader of a Catholic Church in the world. It's utterly heartbreaking the way our leader of the Catholic Church here in Sri Lanka behaves. Like you saw earlier on, the very organization he criticized and ridiculed, He's now going and pleading them to come back and attack our country. Why? Because for him, when the circumstances change, he chooses to act in a manner that's un-Christ-like. You can fight for the victims in a better way. You don't have to fight for the victims and in the process create another million more victims because of your actions. I hope the leader of the I sincerely hope the leader of the Sri Lanka's Catholic Church will remember Christ on his quest to get justice. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not asking the leader of the Catholic Church in Sri Lanka to forgive the perpetrators of the Easter Sunday massacre that took innocent lives of our brothers and sisters. Instead, fight hard, fight strong, but fight Christ-like.
Quello che ha fatto le cose più brutte nella vita ha possibilità di essere perdonato? Sì, sì. Nessuno è escluso dal perdono di Dio, soltanto che si avvicini a Gesù, pentito e con la voglia di essere abbracciato.
We'll be right back. Welcome back everyone to the State of the Nation. Another issue that was brought in at the UNHRC this time around from the LTT-loving Western clan was the need to change our Prevention of Terrorism Act. What? After being battered for terrorism for over 30 years with a new carnage just a few years ago, surely the Western world must be joking, asking us to repeal our Prevention of Terrorism Act.
The EU acknowledges the proposed delimited reform of the Prevention of Terrorism Act and urges further efforts to bring it in line with international standards.
More comprehensive reforms are urgently needed to bring counter-terrorism legislation in line with international standards.
We call upon Sri Lanka to cooperate fully and effectively with the High Commissioner and the UN institution.
Benelux countries encourage the Sri Lankan government to fully cooperate with OHCHR.
All right, joining me now is the former Commissioner of Human Rights in Sri Lanka, Professor Mahieash. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining me. Now, the talk of the town at the UNHRC from the Western clan, apparently this time, it is the PTA. That's the problem. Earlier on, it was about human rights, and this time around, it's the PTA. Professor, what is so detrimental about our PTA?
Mahieash, actually, we have seen most of these human rights resolutions passed against Sri Lanka by UNHRC up to 30/1 was based on gross violation of international humanitarian law, international human rights law, as well as certain torture and other intimidation done by the forces. But now this has been shifted. If you see this 49th session, the report submitted by Honorable Michelle Bachelet, Part F, it is very clearly say, Part F, it is very clearly say, Counter-Terrorism Act. Now what are the reasons? Now they have shifted from the old so-called song, that is war crimes or even crimes done in the war period. Now it has been changed because of these reasons. Number one, Easter attack, Easter Sunday attack, that is where one we have seen. And the other one is presidential pardon, which had been given under the PTA Act, those who have arrested. And also long time detained LTT suspects, as well as more than 70, they say more than 70 arrested, putting social media certain comments or maybe social media posters which arrested them under PTA. So because of these reasons, now the trend has been changed. Part F of the report submitted by OCHCR very clearly address the main issue now is PTA. And also I have seen Honorable Cardinal Malcolm Ranjit had also gone and visited there and given submissions. And before that, Joseph Rayasapulle, earlier the Bishop also had given several data statements with regard to that innocent Tamilians were killed by armed forces or arrested or disappeared. Now the trend is a little bit changed. Now we go with not with the old trend, but the new trend which is coming with Easter Sunday attack and to publish the report, and those things are there, but most of them are internally, which happened in other countries are not much questions.
True. Professor, now what are the key comparisons we can make with other nations' implementation structural legislator in order to combat terrorism, what they've done and what we've done?
Yeah, now when I see Sri Lanka report, it's clearly say Prevention of Terrorism Act. It clearly, they say arbitrary detention, arbitrary arrest, torture, and also two vague definitions were given in Sri Lanka PTA. But if you see Counter-Terrorism Act, which passed this year in Switzerland, which is very, very clear, terrorism more and too vaguely, which has been defined more too vaguely, and this leaves open door for the arbitrary measures which could threaten to the rights of the citizen who have done nothing wrong in the country. And also principles of separation of powers also not respected, because apart from the house arrest, federal police will be responsible under the Counter-Terrorism Act, both in deciding and implementing the measures. Also, it's a violation of ECHR because which prohibits putting people in detention only with the suspicion. So those are some of the cases we know, presumption of innocence. And also this law applies to young people, and anyone can be arrested under this law. So UN Convention of Right to Child, certain amendments, certain certain provisions are violated, and also the new anti-legislation law which give the federal police to arrest anyone. So according to all these international standards, I have seen even United Nations Security Council also, they are not much giving definition, but intermediation, coercion, and also population and other government agencies, what we have done. Now if you see India also have Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, UAPE. So under the UAPE also we have seen people detained for a long time period and also producing any incriminating evidence and strict requirement of granting bail. That is very, very, now not only in Sri Lanka, if you see India, we are very restricted before anyone funding for terrorist financing or even giving certain type of facilities. That is a real threat. And also Sri Lankans were arrested in Chennai, Tamil Nadu. We have seen those who are supporting after the regaining of LTT. They were arrested under this law. So very strict, because we have to stop this at a stage, because terrorism, if it is spreading in Southeast Asia, it's a threat for India as well as the other countries. Even in USA, if you see basically there are certain, the act is where after 9/11 they came with the Patriotic Act, but you may have seen USA strengthening America by providing appropriate tools required to interpret the obstruct terrorism, that is USA Patriotic Act of 2001, which is clearly shown that section 215 the government used justify the National Security Agency controversial phone records program. And also under this Patriotic Act, someone can be arrested for suspicion, only with suspicion of basically connected to ISIS and other armed groups, fundamental groups, and certain people were arrested. A doctor also sometimes back it was arrested because checking the computer, but later released. So they are very, very strict on that. And also legalize the tap and trace devices and sneak and peek, made it easier for FBI to invade the privacy of the citizens. And also section 505 gag orders, violation of the First Amendment rights of freedom. So likewise, I can compare many, many countries. So all these countries today, what is the trend? They are trying to strict enforce these laws against terrorism, terrorism financing, money laundering, and other areas. Why? We must have a very peaceful world. Now, if these armed groups come up, fundamental groups come up, it can be a threat for Sri Lanka also. So this is where the UNHRC also must consider perfectly a comparative study, comparative analysis.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Pratibha Mahieash, the former Commissioner of Human Rights here in Sri Lanka. Always appreciate it, sir. Well, to wrap up tonight's program, listen, we have to understand these simple facts. And no, it's not said to make you fear, but understanding the truth and acting accordingly is crucial right now. We cannot be duped by the bull and ruin our nation's prospects and especially our future. Right now, our economy is tanking. It's the truth and the reality. It's like our plane is going down. The pilot is working on a fix, but the plane's direction is coming down towards Earth. So we do not have many options. Most self-proclaimed economic pundits and opposition MPs, especially people like Dr. Harsha De Silva, is peeking to the gallery saying, this is just a simple fix, it's not sustainable, this, that. But buddy, we are going down, there's no option. We just have to find whatever floats and hold on to dear life. So talks about building a new plane mid-air to get out of the one that's crashing is redundant and worthless, just like Maithripala Sirisena. Also, don't forget, we have been here before. We've faced more severe crises than this. We have come out of it bruised and scathed, but very much alive. Sri Lanka will come out of this too, and that's a fact. Sri Lanka will, and Sri Lanka definitely can. Considering all that, the state of our nation is very concerning tonight. So let's now work hard to pull through. Well, that's all the time I have for you tonight. In case you couldn't catch this program live, please watch it on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/English. I'm Mahieash Johnney. Remember to stay positive, test negative. I'll see you soon. Goodbye.
Stay up on that rise, stay up on that rise, never come down. Oh, stay up on that rise, stay up on that rise, never come down. Mama said, don't give up, it's a little complicated, all tied up.